You're not tired because you think too much. You're tired because you're always trying to predict pain before it happens. Not the big, obvious pain. Not heartbreak. Not failure. Not loss. The small stuff. The awkward moments. The wrong choices. The regret you might feel later. The embarrassment you might experience. The disappointment you might cause. The version of the future where something goes wrong and you blame yourself for not seeing it coming. So you scan everything, every decision, every conversation, every risk, every move. You don't call it fear. You call it thinking. You call it being careful. You call it being prepared. You call it being smart. But deep down, it's not about intelligence. It's about control. Because control feels safer than uncertainty, and certainty feels safer than emotion. Overthinking isn't trying to understand life. It's trying to avoid feeling something later. That's the part nobody talks about. People say overthinking means you're analytical. People say it means you're deep. People say it means you're introspective. People say it means you're aware. But if we're honest, most overthinking isn't insight. It's insurance. Emotional insurance. You're not solving problems. You're trying to prevent future pain. You replay conversations not to understand them, but to make sure you didn't mess up. You analyze decisions not to improve, but to avoid regret. You plan outcomes not to succeed, but to reduce the chance of disappointment. You imagine scenarios not to prepare, but to protect yourself from shock. That's not intelligence. That's emotional risk control. And it's exhausting, because your mind never rests. It's always scanning, always predicting, always calculating, always running simulations of futures that don't exist yet. What if I say the wrong thing? What if I choose wrong? What if I regret it later? What if this goes badly? What if I look stupid? What if I hurt someone? What if I fail? What if I lose this chance? What if I waste time? What if I'm wrong? Your brain becomes a prediction machine. Not for success, not for growth, not for joy, for pain prevention. And the worst part? It feels responsible. It feels mature. It feels logical. It feels like self-awareness. It feels like intelligence. So you trust it. You think, if I think enough, I'll make the perfect choice. If I analyze enough, I won't regret anything. If I prepare enough, I won't be hurt. If I plan enough, I won't fail. If I predict enough, I'll stay safe. But safety isn't peace. Safety becomes a cage when it's built from fear, because eventually, thinking replaces living. You stop moving. You stop choosing. You stop acting. You stop trusting. You stop trying. Not because you don't care, but because every choice feels heavy. Every decision feels loaded. Every option feels risky. Every path feels dangerous. Every move feels irreversible. So you freeze. Mental paralysis doesn't come from confusion. It comes from fear of emotional consequences, not fear of the event, fear of how it will feel if it goes wrong, not fear of failure, fear of self-blame, not fear of rejection, fear of shame, not fear of loss, fear of regret. So you try to outthink emotion. You try to calculate your way out of vulnerability. But emotions don't work like math. You can't logic your way into safety. You can't analyze your way into certainty. You can't plan your way into control. You can't predict your way into peace. Because life doesn't move in straight lines. People don't follow patterns. Outcomes don't follow logic. And feelings don't follow plans. So the more you think, the more variables appear. The more possibilities multiply. The more outcomes you imagine. The more risks you see. The more danger you detect. Until your mind becomes crowded. Not with clarity, with noise. Not with insight, with tension. Not with understanding, with pressure. This is why overthinking doesn't calm you. It stimulates you. It activates you. It keeps you alert. It keeps you scanning. It keeps you tense. Because your nervous system isn't trying to understand life. It's trying to survive it. And survival mode doesn't think clearly. It predicts threats. So your brain starts treating emotional pain like physical danger. Rejection becomes a threat. Failure becomes a threat. Embarrassment becomes a threat. Disappointment becomes a threat. Uncertainty becomes a threat. Not uncomfortable, dangerous. So your system responds the same way it would to danger. Hyper-awareness, hyper-analysis, hyper-planning, hyper-vigilance, hyper-control. That's not overthinking. That's protection. You're not broken. You're not weak. You're not defective. You're trying to stay safe in a world where pain feels unpredictable. So your mind builds strategies. Think ahead. Prepare for worst case. Plan every outcome. Avoid mistakes. Avoid risk. Avoid uncertainty. Avoid exposure. Avoid vulnerability. But here's the trap. The more you try to prevent pain, the smaller your life becomes. Not physically, internally. Your world shrinks to what feels safe. Your choices shrink to what feels controlled. Your risks shrink to what feels predictable. Your dreams shrink to what feels manageable. Your voice shrinks to what feels acceptable. Your honesty shrinks to what feels safe to say. You don't notice it happening because it feels responsible. But one day you realize you're not living carefully. You're living cautiously. And there's a difference. Careful means aware. Cautious means afraid. Careful still moves. Cautious freezes. Careful still risks. Cautious avoids. Careful learns from pain. Cautious tries to eliminate pain. And pain can't be eliminated. It can only be experienced. So your system works harder, thinks more, plans more, analyzes more, predicts more, calculates more, trying to do the impossible, trying to build a future where nothing hurts. That's the hidden fear behind overthinking everything. Not stupidity, not weakness, not lack of confidence. Fear of emotional impact. Fear of the feeling. Fear of regret. Fear of shame. Fear of disappointment. Fear of self-blame. Fear of being wrong. Fear of loss of control. Fear of not being able to handle it. So your mind becomes a guard, not a guide to guard, checking every thought, scanning every choice, blocking every risk, questioning every move. And slowly, quietly, your life turns into observation instead of participation. You watch more than you act. You think more than you feel. You analyze more than you experience. You plan more than you live. Not because you don't want more, but because you're trying not to get hurt. And that's where mental paralysis is born. Not in confusion, not in complexity, not in lack of knowledge, but in the fear of emotional consequences. Because choosing means risk, acting means exposure, trying means possible failure, loving means possible loss, speaking means possible judgment, trusting means possible disappointment. So the mind says, wait, think more, analyze again, double check, reconsider, don't rush, be careful, not yet. And it feels wise. But sometimes, be careful is just fear in a polite voice. You don't overthink because you lack clarity. You overthink because you lack emotional safety inside yourself. So you try to create it with logic, with planning, with analysis, with prediction. But safety built in the mind never lasts. Real safety comes from knowing I can handle what happens. I can survive the feeling. I can recover. I can adapt. I can learn. And once that trust exists, thinking no longer has to control your life. It can simply support it. Because the fear was never the future. It was the feeling you didn't trust yourself to face.